So as I was saying, if you change, for example, the values in here, you put silencer and for example spaz, and in the game you pick the first set, the first weapon set, you're gonna still get M4 and MP5 because on dialog respond, the values that you put will be for M4 and MP5. So you need to worry about that. Other than that, you can change the colors freely to anything you like. You can probably give each set a different color, but make sure your script doesn't look like a rainbow, because that's what people used to tell me when I made the Zone at the start. I had like different colors everywhere. So don't use too many colors. Make something good. And for example, for the second weapon set, again you have M4 and stabulated, and then shotgun, and then remember this, for example, M4 is only 2 words, so you need 3 times. Sometimes if this is something big, for example country rifle, then you need 2/thieves. If you put 3, then the availability will be it won't be in the right alignment with the rest of your text. So for second weapon limit, M4 shotgun, again you type weapon limit 1 minus times picked for attackers 1, because we are dealing here with attackers. And then once you're done, because you can, I made 2 strings in here, because if you put all this, if you put everything, this one and here, if you put all this in one line, you will get an error because the line will be too large. That's why I made 2 strings. So I did half of the stuff in the first string, I did another half in the second string, and then I made a third string where I combine the first 2 strings. So format the third string, and then I put first string and then another string, my other string, weapon string 0 and weapon string 1. And at the end you show a player dialog. Now I could just show one player dialog here, down here, but this is the dialog title, and if you can see I gave different colors. So for attackers, the title of the weapon set will be in red, and for defenders the title of the weapon limit dialog will be on blue. You can check out on show player dialog parameters in SAMP Wikipedia. So these are all the parameters. So this is the player ID to whom you want to show the dialog ID. Now for the dialog ID, I put dialog weapon set. So you can put a number in here, ID, but instead of a number, so if you put a number in here and you have too many dialogs, then on dialog respond you won't be able to, you might forget which ID was your weapon dialog. So instead of putting, for example, 1, you can define this. You can define 1. So you can say define weapon dialog weapon type, or dialog anything, and then type 1. So this 1 is equal to dialog weapon type. So instead of typing 1, you can type this, and then you will know which dialog you're talking about, and on dialog respond as well. So you go back to show. So this is the player ID, this is the dialog ID. Now this one is the dialog style list. Now for the weapon sets, you use dialog style list. You can use different dialog styles, which I think, yeah, we see here in SAMP Wikipedia. So these are different styles. For example, if you are making a dialog for login, then you should use dialog style password, so it can cover your characters, and it can also be an input dialog. This is dialog style list. It looks something like this. So we're gonna use dialog style list in here because we have a list of weapons. You can put dialog style input, for example, or dialog style message, which I used for Auto Arena. For example, if you join the server, as soon as you join the server, you see top 10 players and top 10 gangs. That's where I used dialog style message. These buttons, you can either put the buttons, or if you look here, it's dialog style, and then the next parameter is the caption, which is the title of the dialog. So for the title, I put select your weapon set, and then what you want to put inside the dialog. So inside the dialog we want to put the final string. After we have everything, our Gamemode, all this goes in your info, and then this is your first button and this is your next button. So this is for attacker. And now again exactly the same thing for defender, but with different colors. It's exactly the same way but with different colors. And also note that the time spec in here is this time for defenders. So defenders has their own time spec and attackers have their own time spec. The weapon limit is the same for both attack and defender because the weapon limit won't change anyways. So do it this way. You show weapon for the player. So this is only gonna show a dialog for the player. If you script up to here, it will only show a dialog, and if you click on any weapon set, it's not gonna do anything because you haven't defined this dialog on dialog response. So if you go to on dialog and response, these are the parameters. Now because we used the list dialog, we use list items. If you had an input dialog, then you should be worrying about this input text. So in here, type if dialog ID equals dialog weapon 1. So you can either type if dialog ID equals 1, or if you type 1 and you have so many dialogs, then you won't know what the 1 was, what the dialog was. That's why we defined 1 to be dialog weapon type. So if response equals 1, so in here we're saying if the player clicked on the first list item. No, in here we're saying if the player clicked on the first button. If response equals 1 means if the player clicked on the first button, which was select, then do all this. But if the player clicked on the next button, if you don't even have to put anything, you don't have to put an else case for it. If the player clicked on the next button, it's just gonna remove the dialog for the player. So you don't really have to do anything about it. Later on we might do something, because if the player gets the dialog and he doesn't want a weapon and the round is paused, for example, he shouldn't be able to move once he closed the dialog. So you can check in here and see if to make sure that the player freezes after he closes the dialog. But for now, just put if response equals 1, which means if the player clicked on select that we had as a first button, then if the list item is not equal to 0. Now if you don't put this, you're gonna get an error if you click on the first item. So put if list item is not equal to 0, then it will check this case in here checks if the weapon set is full. So in here, if you look, it says if the player team is attacker and time spec attacker list item -1 is bigger than the weapon limit list item -1. Now because our weapons start from weapon set 1, if you look, because weapon set 0 was the title, so if the player clicked on the title, if you remember I said switch list item. So if the list item, if this ID is 0, which means if the player clicked on the first set, which is the title, then we are just showing the player the weapon dialog again. But if the player clicked on the next list item, and then the next set, then the player will get M4 and MP5. So in here the list item is equal to 1. But if you remember our weapon limit and time spec, they both start from 0 to 9. So the weapon limit for M4 and MP5 was 0, if you remember from here. So this is M4 MP5. If you look, the weapon limit is 0. That doesn't mean the weapon limit is 0, but this is the variable for the first weapon limit. So weapon limit 0 means the limit for this M4 and MP5 or whatever it is. Yeah, M4 and MP5. But in the dialog, on the dialog, it's the first. The list item is 1, so you have to do list item -1, which is 0 again. So you're saying if the player team is attacker and the number of times attackers picked the first weapon, which is M4 and MP5, is bigger than or equal to the weapon limit. So if the weapon limit is 1 and one of the attackers picked M4 and MP5, then that will mean that the times picked is equal to the weapon limit. So the weapon limit is 1 and one attacker picked the weapon. So they will both be equal. In that case, you are sending the player a message error and this weapon set is currently full, and then return 1 so that the script does not read anything below this. But you need to do this both for attacker and defender. So if the player team is attacker and times picked attacker for the first weapon set is equal to weapon limit, or if the player team is defender and times picked for defender is equal to the weapon limit, then you show them the dialog again so they can pick another weapon, and then send client message, this weapon set is full, return 1. Now create a string so you can send an email, send a text for all the other players. Now type switch list item. If the player click on the first set, which is the title, he's gonna get the weapon menu again, and the script won't read anything else. It's just gonna return 1. If the player clicked on the second set, which is our M4 and MP5, then the player will get then give the player these weapons, times picked, player ID, team. Now this will increase the times picked based on the player team. So if my team is, for example, attacker, and I picked M4 and MP5, it's gonna increase the times picked for attackers for list item -1. So for list item -1, which is 0. So it's gonna be times picked attacker 0 plus plus. Plus plus means it's just gonna increase by 1. You can put this whole thing equals again this whole thing plus 1 or plus plus, and then remember I told you we'll make another variable per player to see which weapon that the player picked. So here type player ID weapon picked equals list item. So now we know that the player picked the first list item, and then send a message, format string, size of string. Now if you look here, normally if you put M4 and MP5 it won't work for you, because you have to go to Wikipedia. You can type samp weapon IDs. So you have to put an ID in here. For example, M4 is 31, so you have to put 31 in here. But if you want to put M4 and MP5 like this, you'll have to define them. So instead of putting a number, you can define them. I think I defined them up there. So yeah, I defined knife, silencer, deagle, shotgun, combat, MP4, MP5, everything. With all these numbers. So instead of the numbers, I can just put the name of the weapon. Again, back to dialog. So the player will get these two weapons. The times picked based on the team for that weapon set will increase, and you're keeping a record. And in here, instead of making two cases for attacker and defender, I made another variable called the text color. So you can make this variable text color for each team. For example, for attacker, defender, referee, for each team, and for each set. So no, I mean this is for each team, and this is the size of this variable, just like we have the size for a string.